Today's subject before us is Swami Vivekananda in American context. There's a well-known book, a well-known work. The title of this book is Abroad in America, Visitors to the New Nation during the period 1776 to 1914, the beginning of the First World War. A list of all the prominent visitors to this country, their observations, and what they felt about this nation and the society. The write-up on Swami Vivekananda gives a quotation from one of Swami Vivekananda's letters written from Chicago, November 1893. That's about 2 months after Swami Vivekananda's first address at the Parliament of Religion. Asia laid the gems of civilization, Europe developed man, and America is developing women and the masses. The Americans are fast becoming liberal, and this great nation is progressing fast towards that spirituality which was the standard boast of the Hindus. This is the quotation. Swamiji here speaks about what he saw in this country in the last decade of 19th century. Now, the one unique aspect of this socio-economic political experiment which we call America, that Swamiji was highly impressed by, was the spirit of freedom, liberty. Though Swamiji lamented that this spirit of freedom and liberty were confined to the material plane, still he was a great admirer of the egalitarian spirit upon which this nation was built. Swami Vivekananda, makes an interesting observation about the radical transformation that people migrating to this nation from different parts of the European continent felt. For example, you know that the whole nation was built upon migration, mostly from Europe during the early centuries. Swami Vivekananda says, "You may be astonished to hear that as practical Vedantists, the Americans are extremely good. I used to stand at seashore in New York and look at the immigrants coming from different countries, crushed, downtrodden, hopeless, unable to look a man in the face. And mark you, in 6 months, those very men were walking erect, well-clothed, looking everybody in the face. And what made this wonderful difference? Said this man comes from Armenia or somewhere else where he was crushed down beyond all recognition. Even the air murmured around him as it were, 'There is no hope for you, hopeless and a slave you must remain.'" Vivekananda often referred to the large-scale migrations from Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and also countries like Armenia, Eastern Europe, and many places, many parts of the Russian Empire. Swami Vivekananda observed that within a very short time, they start feeling, well, they too can achieve great things in this country. If they work hard, if they display honesty, sincerity, and enthusiasm, the sky is the limit. The problem was in Asia and also in much of Europe, there was so much of conservatism at the cultural level, and so much of the pull of the old feudal structure. Many people born into this hereditary bondage felt that they are destined to live under these miserable circumstances. But once they reached this nation, they felt the land is vast, plenty of resources, people are free. If you have got the ability to work hard, if you are sincere, if you have the enthusiasm and the zeal, you can build a new future for yourself. In fact, this trend continues to our own times. Of course, things have changed, but this basic trend continues to our own times. But Swami Vivekananda's great lament was, this concept of freedom was largely confined to the material plane. So he thought, if one could stretch this concept of freedom beyond the material plane and stretch it to the spiritual plane, this nation will become an ideal society. So, in many ways, he considered America to be an ideal society, a fertile soil to spread the message of spiritual freedom, that is, the philosophy of non-dualism. There was material freedom, but there was not much freedom at the religious level. We have to think of the 19th century America. Of course, to understand 19th century America, we have to go a little backward. In a way, if you compare the social and cultural trends that were spreading in America in the later half of 19th century, you'll be reminded of what was happening in Europe in 14th and 15th centuries, maybe 16th centuries, a kind of renaissance. So what happened in Europe in 14th and 15th centuries was happening in America in the later half of 19th century. Maybe throughout 19th century we can say. Of course, in Europe, it was opening up to the wisdom of the ancient Greco-Roman civilization. In America, it was opening the doors and windows to the treasure of the ancient Oriental spiritual culture. That was the main difference. And the fruits of this Renaissance movement in America could be seen in the works of Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, and a host of other great thinkers, not only transcendentalists, but also among the Unitarians. What Swami Vivekananda effected was reconstruction of the bridge that was lost for centuries, may need a little historical explanation. According to historians like Durand and Toynbee, there was a close interaction between the Oriental civilizations like India and to a lesser extent China and the ancient Greece and later Rome through Alexandria. That's how mathematics, astronomy, and many of the sciences which originated in India reached Europe through the Arabs, mostly through the universities with the Arabs established in Spain. And before they reached Spain, in Damascus, great mathematics, for example, many of the theories, laws related to astronomy were all actually the contribution of the Arabs to Europe, and Arabs got them from India. But gradually what happened, during the Middle Ages, during the Dark Ages, this link was lost. And then with the Industrial Revolution, with the new interest in science and technology, with the discovery of sea routes, with the abundant supply of raw materials from different distant colonies, Europe began to progress at the material level. But in America, a new trend was developing. America was the result of of a unique socio-economic political experiment, though it was confined to the material level. You'll be surprised if I compare the views of utopian socialists and the views of the American founding fathers. Utopian socialists were the great thinkers of Europe, like Robert Owen in England, Charles Freire and Saint-Simon, the two French thinkers, who believed that the rich people at one stage will contribute to the wealth for the good of the proletarian classes, the poor people. But Marx ridiculed this as a kind of utopian socialism. That kind of egalitarian system can never be established. But in America, excepting in some aspects of some slavery and other discrimination in some areas, an experiment was taking place to establish a unique egalitarian society based on liberty, equality, and freedom. Now, Swami Vivekananda came in America in 1893. That was the time when religion was terribly misunderstood in this country. The nation had lost in the dogmas and doctrines of the old established religions. Marxism and the teachings of Engels and the neo-positivists and the new scientists, those who discovered new scientific and technological concepts, were challenging some of the fundamental doctrines of established religions, like Genesis, the idea that God created this world 6,000 years back, that God supervises his creation, that God threatens the non-believers with hellfire and promises the believers with heaven. Such ideas were being challenged by scientists, positivists, and also the modern humanists of 19th century. So what Europe, and much more than Europe, America was looking for was a religious doctrine that taught us that religion and spirituality can be as scientific as science itself. It can be as humanistic as humanism itself. Religion and spirituality can become a unifying, harmonizing force in this world, and not a divisive force. God doesn't live outside of human being. God lives within us, within all of us. And the same God is the all-pervading reality. So an idea of a God that goes beyond creatorship, that goes beyond the role of a transcendental moral authority, a most uncompromising moral authority. That is the kind of religion which America was looking for. And Vivekananda came here and declared that true religion is a matter of inner experience that goes beyond rituals, dogmas, and doctrines. True religion is a matter of inner spiritual pilgrimage, spiritual journey. True religion is, as I said, is a matter of inner experience of the divine spark within all of us. And once we understand this, then we cannot hate anybody. We can look upon the whole mankind as one spiritual fraternity. That was Swami Vivekananda's teaching. Now, this was a radical deviation, departure from anything that Americans have ever heard till that moment. You have to remember, America was familiar with some of these teachings, but not directly. The Unitarians were familiar with the essays of Schopenhauer, who translated some of the Upanishads and wrote articles in German magazines on Vedanta philosophy. Great thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau were also familiar with some of these Vedantic ideas, like the absolute reality, living within all of us, and so on. But again, it was the first time in their history that they heard from a real authority who was speaking on the basis of his experience that the Upanishads, the Vedanta, is a religion that's a sum total of the spiritual aspirations of the whole humanity. Now, today if you travel in this country, you can see innumerable yoga studios. You can see a new trend, a trend towards broader and more humanistic views among different religious groups. For the first time, that idea that other religions too contain the sparks of spiritual truth came from Swami Vivekananda. Now, about 19th century India, there is a quotation from Carl Jackson. He says, intellectually, the 18th century movement that seemed to hold the greatest promise of awakening American interest in Oriental thoughts was the Enlightenment, which was to have such a profound influence on American thought and institutions generally. So he says that 19th century became the period of American religious renaissance. Before Vivekananda came, the Oriental wisdom and Oriental spiritual thought was misinterpreted and portrayed in the darkest possible colors by missionaries who went abroad to convert people into their own faith. So here, when there is a letter, the Oriental missionaries presented the horror stories of Oriental barbarism, such as hook swinging, Jagannath stampedes, sati, female infanticide, and also other social injustices. But at the same time, a few great thinkers who were familiar with these ideas portrayed the unique transcendental philosophy of Upanishads, which taught a kind of universal spiritual humanism which helps us to look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual brotherhood and appreciate the spiritual values of all religious traditions. Here, for example, Ralph Waldo Emerson spearheaded the Transcendental Movement as the first American to reconcile Eastern and Western thought. A few works of Emerson, like the Ethical Scriptures, Brahma, and then his essays on Plato, fate, illusions, all these disclose and reveal his great attraction for India's mysticism and spirituality. So, on the one hand, there was the dark picture presented by the missionaries, which Swamiji himself referred to on many occasions. On the other hand, there was the glorious picture of India's or Vedantic spiritual tradition presented by the Unitarians and also by the leaders of the transcendental movements. But what really happened in course of time, the American society understood that along with material progress, along with science and technology, we also need a higher progress and spiritual level. In a way, what innovation, experimentation mean in science and technology can be found in non-dualism. I can just compare the features of a highly evolved, developed, scientifically and technologically advanced civilization and Vedanta. Now, science and technology, efficiency, very high level of management and organization genius help us to eradicate most of the problems in this world. Poverty, illiteracy, social and economic backwardness, opening the doors and opportunities to everyone. All these can be achieved through science and technology, especially innovation, which is a unique feature of the American genius. But innovation will be all right in business, industry, and technology, because every innovation gives a quantum leap towards a higher level of scientific and technological development. Every innovation is a deviation, further expansion of the existing system. But innovation doesn't work in the area of spirituality. In spiritual life, we have to follow the teachings of the great masters of ancient times, who had reached this high level of spirituality. So Vivekananda makes this distinction. So if we can combine the efficiency, the organizational genius, the innovative spirit, the enthusiasm, the dignity of labor, the leadership skills, and the management genius of a well-developed modern society, and ancient spiritual wisdom, that will help us to build an ideal society. A society cannot live without bread, but a society cannot live without the bread of spirit either. Not only bread at the material plane, but at the spiritual plane. We call the soul. So Swami Vivekananda wanted that a highly developed, economically advanced society can become a perfect society if it also adopts a highly developed spiritual philosophy. Now, what do we mean by a highly developed spiritual philosophy? He mentioned again and again, he repeated, freedom is the first condition of growth, a dictum, almost like a motto, as a slogan. So Vivekananda repeated again and again in his lectures in this country and also outside, mostly in this country. Freedom is the first condition of growth. Wherever there is freedom, there will be growth. If you give freedom in society, society will grow. If you give freedom in religious, spiritual area, spirituality will grow. Now, what really happened in Europe and in the Greco-Roman tradition was, there was plenty of freedom at the material level, material plane. Plenty of freedom at the social level, but no freedom at the religious level. The slightest deviation from the established way of practicing religion will cause excommunication, inquisition, and different kinds of persecution. So spirituality did not grow. So religion came to be defined as a blind way of following certain established rituals and conviction traditions. If somebody goes to his room and meditates, during the Inquisition days you find, anybody, even if the neighbor can report you against the neighbor. Within one's own family, they used to report against each other to the Inquisition group. This happened during the Middle Ages. This happens because there was no freedom in religious plane, but there was freedom in social plane. People could just travel from Europe to America and discover a new continent, colonize this country, develop this nation, because there was freedom. And within America, how this huge nation was colonized, how this became prosperous. So much of freedom. Now look at the Orient. There was freedom in religious plane, no freedom in the social plane. You'll be surprised if I tell you, for almost a period of almost 800 years, there was a belief in India it is wrong to cross the ocean. It's a terrible sin. So if you cross the ocean, you may be excommunicated. That was the view of some of the Orthodox Hindu, more spiritual religious authorities. Which was not so in the early days. It was a later superstition that crept into society. So at the social level, there was no freedom. There was restriction at every level. So society becomes backward. At the same time, in religious level, there are plenty of freedom. Look at Buddha, for example. Buddha was born a Hindu. His teachers were all Hindus. And those to whom he preached were all Hindus. In fact, he started his preaching right in front of the holiest and most ancient Hindu temple in India, that is Benares, Kashi. Nobody bothered. He was given full freedom. So also innumerable other religions which grew within India, Jainism, not only Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism and so on. I can give an example. I was born within about 25 miles away from the place where the Jews landed in 4th century BC. The first Jewish migration to India took place in the 4th century BC when the Jewish temples were destroyed by the Assyrians. The second migration took place in 54 AD. The third one took place in 70 AD when the Masada was destroyed by the Romans. The Roman 10th Legion destroyed Masada. Now, you know what happened when the Jews came to India? The Hindu kings who did not know anything about Judaism, never even heard of it. They found, well, these people seem to be strangers. They have a different way of worshipping God. What they did, they handed over to them temples. And they converted these temples into synagogues. That synagogue existed till 1565. It was destroyed by Portuguese who came later. And the Portuguese were driven away and the Hindu kings rebuilt this synagogue, which still stands. Why? Because there was spiritual freedom, religious freedom. They did not know anything about this foreign religion. But they knew that these people are sincere followers of God as they understood Him. So they were given full freedom. The same thing happened to the followers of St. Thomas who came in 52 AD, a few decades after the crucifixion of Jesus, at a time when the lions in Roman cages were making breakfast of the early Christians in Rome, mind you. Or they were forced to fight as gladiators in Roman amphitheater. And when St. Thomas came, almost maybe 10 miles away from the place where the Jews came 3 times, they were allowed to build their churches. Some of them still continue to exist. Maybe not the original ones, but it's the same spot. And again, I can give another example. Malik Dinar was supposed to be a follower of Prophet Muhammad, who came almost to the same region within a distance of maybe 30-40 miles. And he was an Arab trader who later became a Muslim. The Arabs were coming as traders to sell dates. So he was allowed to build a mosque. Maybe this must have happened 615, something around, almost during the period of Prophet Muhammad. In fact, that place, that mosque still stands there. It's almost like a Hindu temple. The local king handed over to these Arabs an ancient Hindu temple which they converted into a masjid. Again, in the 8th century, a group of Zoroastrian Parsis came to the west coast. And the same thing happened. What I'm going to tell you is, when there is freedom in religion and spirituality grows, and we become spiritually evolved. We get a higher idea of what God really means. In the beginning, we may think religion means going to temples, reading books. As we evolve further, when we reach a higher level of spiritual evolution, we start feeling that God lives within us. We can practice religion and spirituality even outside the place of worship. Even without going to a temple or a church or a synagogue, anywhere, we can practice spirituality through our actions. So at the last stage, we understand God lives everywhere, within us and also outside, in everybody. Now, this is the goal of all religious activities. This is the final destination of spiritual evolution, because freedom is allowed. Now, in science and technology, in the material plane, the social plane, the same freedom helps you to evolve a highly advanced egalitarian society. That is what Swami Vivekananda found in this country. Vivekananda traveled all over India. You know what he found? He found such great philosophers, saints and sages who were living in caves, whom he met, discussed. He prayed to them, he learned from them, but he understood one problem. They were all living in caves, isolated places, doing penance, meditation all the time. And then when he came out of these pilgrim centers, he came in contact with the common people, the society as a whole. Poverty, starvation, illiteracy, social backwardness, and all kinds of superstitions. So you find at social level, there's a big problem. Superstition, poverty, illiteracy, and backwardness. At the spiritual level, there were a few great spiritual personalities. So there is a memorable statement in Vivekananda's complete works. India produced the greatest saint, the greatest number of the greatest saints and sages in the world, but the price we had to pay was the degeneration of the masses. It's a great statement. There is an irony in it. There is also a bitter truth. There is a despair and also a great desire to correct some of the social remedies. He said, India produced the greatest number of the greatest saints and sages in the world, but the price we had to pay was the degeneration of the masses. What Swami Vivekananda meant was this. Great saints and sages were born. If you look at the history of India, just remember the founders of Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, they were all blood. And there were hundreds of such saints and sages throughout history. Even now there are unknown. But that doesn't help the common people, society. So what we need, addressing the masses in India, he said, you have to learn the science and technology, the efficiency, the organization skill, all this from Western nations. Similarly, Western nations should learn the universal spiritual humanism of the non-dualistic philosophy, Vedanta. They should think beyond the God as a creator, a God who sits somewhere above as a tyrant. God is not at fault. The way God was interpreted for centuries. You have to remember that. Religion was not at fault, but religion was interpreted in the wrong way. There was always a conflict between theology, philosophy, and mysticism. But this conflict was totally absent in Vedantic tradition. But it was a reality throughout Middle Ages. For example, great mystics who slightly deviated from the dogmatic interpretation of theological literature were persecuted. And philosophers who slightly gave a different view were excommunicated. So there was always a conflict between the orthodox theology and a new philosopher. And also there was a conflict between the theology and mysticism. Vivekananda said, mysticism is the ultimate goal of true religion. Theology should not be rejected. Theology is necessary. Just as kindergarten is necessary. Primary schools are necessary. So theology also necessary. Philosophy is also necessary. Philosophy stands between theology and mysticism. But philosophy alone cannot make us spiritual, could make us religious, but not spiritual. True spirituality comes when what we learn from philosophy and theology becomes a matter of our own experience, then only God becomes a living entity within us. Otherwise, it is just a word, a concept, an idea. So from an idea, it should become an experience. Now, Vivekananda said, modern America needs such a highly evolved spiritual ideal, the non-dualistic philosophy. Because what America stands for as a socio-economic political experiment, Advaita stands as a spiritual ideal. So in a way, Advaita is American soil is extremely suited for the non-dualistic philosophy. That's what Swami Vivekananda says. The concept of freedom at the material plane should be extended beyond the material plane, then becomes Advaita. So I would say that was Swami Vivekananda's greatest contribution for America. Now, another aspect of Vivekananda's contribution was, as I said, the message of unity and oneness. Now, unity and oneness was already achieved in America at the political level, at the judiciary level, at the economic level. Everyone can choose his own profession. If we go to even European nations, even today, there are some cliches, some hereditary hurdles which everyone has to undergo. If you go to Britain, the higher judiciary, there are problems. In many of the European countries, especially British higher judiciary, it's a problem. So long as household laws continues, how can you say it's an egalitarian society? So even in European nations which have become egalitarian, fully enlightened democratic systems, some element of problem exists. But America is singularly free from all this. Anyone can come here, anyone can work, and the sky is the limits if he is ready to work hard. So there is unity and oneness at the political, at the social and economic level. Now unity and oneness can be and should be practiced at the religious level. Now what is the political equivalent of, what is the spiritual equivalent of political unity? Just remember, the spiritual equivalent of political egalitarianism, it is Advaita. Advaita means non-dualistic system. What does it teach? It teaches that we are all the same, just as every American citizen is same in front of the law. Similarly, Vedanta tells you we are all the same, including non-believers. So religion doesn't mean that you write on the dotted line, I'm a Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim, or whatever it is. Religion means this inner experience. And this inner experience is open to everyone, even to those who deny God. Even non-believers can be Advaitins, because non-dualism is not a religious doctrine, it's a spiritual doctrine. And spirituality deals with our inner essence, what we are in essence. Something beyond the body, mind and intellect. There is a divine spark, Atman, soul, within us all. Even within those who deny it. That's the main difference. Just imagine, just compare. If you take a theological line, then God closes the door in front of somebody who refuses to accept Him. But in non-dualism, God doesn't close the door in front of somebody who says you don't exist. That's why Vivekananda said once, he says, even if you don't accept God, you live your life in such a way that if there is a God, that God accepts you even if you don't accept Him. You live your life in such a way that God will accept you even if you do not accept Him. So it's a kind of universal spiritual humanism, which is a spiritual equivalent of American socio-economic political experiment. Anybody can become spiritual. You need not go to a church. You need not go to a temple. Only you should have a spiritual thirst to know who you are. So this is the unity and oneness, the idea that creation is one, humanity is one, spiritually one. That's one important contribution of Vivekananda. So in 1894, Swami Vivekananda wrote to one of his brother disciples. He is writing about his work in this country. There is no end of work here. Wherever the seed of his power, God's power, will fall, there it will fructify, be it today or in 100 years. So he thought this is a fertile land for the highest spiritual philosophy of Advaita. I am to create a new order of humanity here who are sinners, who believe they are sinners in the presence of God. I should teach them they are not sinners, they are inheritors of the spiritual heritage which belongs to the whole humanity. Now Swamiji is referring to what he felt in Europe and America. Not only here, but also in Europe and America. And even there is something of this idea. This idea means Advaita, non-dualism. It will have to go from India. It has already got there. It will have to grow and increase and save their civilizations too. For in the West, the old order of things is vanishing, giving way to a new order of things, which is the worship of gold, the worship of mammon. That was something which Vivekananda lamented. There is such a high level of egalitarianism, freedom, liberty, equality at the economic, social, judiciary and political level. But the worship of gold, the worship of mammon, that is growing. Now, a highly efficient society may become very rich. But at one point, this wealth itself could become a liability. It happened in Rome, of course. So Vivekananda said, in order to make it a complete and ideal society, a finished society, Vivekananda wanted, it also needs a higher spiritual ideal. And as I said, that is the spiritual democracy. And spiritual democracy means Advaita, non-dualism. I shall explain a few more things about what non-dualism means, because I use the word. Non-dualism is a system of Vedanta philosophy which is enshrined the ancient Vedantic text called the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. It was evolved and developed into a complete and compact philosophical and spiritual system by Shankaracharya in the 8th century. But of course you have to remember it is at least 6,000, 7,000 years old. And Vivekananda in 19th century gave it a new interpretation without deviating even slightly from its fundamental details, fundamental principles, giving a new orientation and interpretation to suit the demands and needs of modern times. Vivekananda was extremely well educated and familiar with the modern trends of 19th century. He was familiar with the history of America, Europe, civilizations, culture, philosophical systems, and so on. And also deeply well versed in the ancient Oriental scriptures of non-dualistic philosophy. So, he gave it a new interpretation, a humanistic, a rational and scientific interpretation. So when he reached this country, he was surprised that this nation stands in complete contrast to what he saw in India. Vivekananda traveled all over India for almost 5 years as a mendicant, moving from place to place, sleeping in the streets and also as guest in the palaces of kings and maharajas. So he had a first-hand experience of what Indian society was like. So he founded one thing. Indian society had a tremendous spiritual treasure in the form of non-dualistic philosophy, a highly evolved egalitarian spiritual philosophy, because it exercised freedom, enjoyed freedom at a spiritual level. But because there was no freedom at the social level or economic level, the country was economically backward, socially backward. Coming to this country, he saw a new picture here. America was at that time celebrating Columbus' discovery of America, 400th anniversary of Columbus' discovery of America. This is a parliament of religion which he attended. He was highly impressed by the scientific and technological progress. There was a display of all the magnificent developments of science and technology in Chicago. And when he traveled in this country, he found that even common people were able to live a relatively comfortable life. Science and technology, wealth, everything was open to everyone. There was more of democracy, freedom and liberty in this country, in sharp contrast to what he saw in India or in the Oriental nations as a whole. So he thought, what could be India's contribution to this country? So he said, there are many things that are great in this country. But then, along with this liberty, freedom, and wealth and development, there is also an element of spiritual poverty. Great churches, great established religious structures were there. But they were teaching highly dogmatic, spiritually almost childish ideas. God lives somewhere. If you don't pray in a particular way, God will punish you. He will send you to hell. So better behave. This kind of ideas going on in Europe also. So Vivekananda was surprised. How can such a highly evolved society, such a scientifically and technologically and economically advanced society, have such a primitive concept of God and religion? So Vivekananda wanted that America should become familiar with the highly scientific and rational philosophy of non-dualism. And he considered this country as a fertile soil for spreading this message of Vedanta. His concept of an ideal nation society had two aspects. On the one hand, we must have socio-economic and political developments. Backwardness and poverty, inefficiency, and scientific and technological backwardness is always a problem. But material development alone cannot make us happy when we want to evolve a complete society, an ideal nation. For that, high spiritual culture is necessary. For that, non-dualistic philosophy is the right spiritual ideal. Because it doesn't ask you to change your religion, change your way of God, change your way of worship or anything. It only teaches you that there is the divine spirit living within all of us. God doesn't live outside anywhere. God lives within all of us. And God lives within everybody. Therefore, it is a kind of spiritual democracy that Vivekananda taught. Along with political democracy, it's a spiritual democracy. Because it helps us to look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family. Everybody is equal before God. All religions, churches, temples, different ways of worship are secondary details. The ultimate goal is to experience this inner divine within us. So, that is the greatest contribution of Vivekananda. So, I would say Vivekananda's contribution could be compared to some of the greatest modern scientific innovations. Because his innovation was in spiritual field. Remember, it was not his creation. Swami Vivekananda repeated again and again that he did not preach anything but the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are at least 8,000 years old. But the credit goes to him to give it a new interpretation that is intelligible to modern man, people living in our own times. And in the context of America's unique socio-economic political development, Vivekananda felt that non-dualism is the right spiritual ideal for this nation. It doesn't reject any religion. It doesn't reject God. It doesn't ask you to change your ways. It only asks you to go deeper into our own accepted spiritual ideal. It enables us to realize and experience the deeper spiritual teachings of our own chosen religious path without changing. No change. But we can go deeper into our own chosen, our own individual religious faiths. If you are Vedantin, you, a Christian, can understand the deeper implications of the teachings of the great Jesus Christ. So also a Hindu, so also a Buddhist, Jew, whoever may be. So it becomes a kind of universal spiritual humanism, which is not a religion, but goes beyond all religions. Rather say, the spiritual ideal, the sum totality of all possible, conceivable human spiritual aspirations. That is the essence of Swami Vivekananda's contribution to this country. Thank you. Namaskar.